The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus told his disciples a parable. Can a blind person guide a blind person? Will not both fall into a pit? No disciple is superior to the teacher. But when fully trained, every disciple will be like his teacher. Why do you notice the splinter in your brother's eye, but do not perceive the wooden beam in your own eye? You hypocrite! Remove the wooden beam from your eye first. Then you will see clearly to remove the splinter in your brother's eye. A good tree does not bear rotten fruit, nor does a rotten tree bear good fruit. For every tree is known by its fruit. For people do not pick figs from thorn bushes, nor do they gather grapes from brambles. A good person out of the store of goodness in his heart produces good, but an evil person out of a store of evil produces evil. For from the fullness of the heart, the mouth speaks. The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Friday morning, early Friday morning, I was listening to a podcast. It was a news-based podcast. I don't want to tell you which podcast it was because I do not want to advertise for it, nor do I want to defame it. But I was listening to a podcast Friday morning, and it was a news-based podcast, and this episode happened to be on what's happening in Ukraine. And several things struck me, but the interviewer, the host of the podcast, had called a man, I don't know how she got his phone number, but a man that lives in Kiev, Ukraine. And the man spoke no English, and he spoke no Russian, and so his niece was there translating, and I don't know why it had to be a 3-step translation, but from Ukrainian to Russian to English, and then back from English to Russian to Ukrainian. And it was a very long interview. But there was one particular question that sparked a good conversation that really caught my mind, that caught my attention. The interviewer asked the man, through his niece, are people in Kiev acting normal? I thought it was an interesting question as Russia enters the city of Kiev. Are people in Kiev acting normal? And the man, without hesitation, I guess the only delay to hear his answer was the 3 steps of translation, but he immediately responded, and he said, no, people are here acting normal. And the interviewer paused for a second and then said, they're acting normal? What about Russia's military? What about their troops? And he says, oh no, they're shooting at us and there's bombs going off, but people are acting normal. That expression was my expression. My eyes just kind of, what? And he says, but there's something different though. The churches are open and they're full. They're full. And he says there's people there 24/7, all throughout the night, all throughout the day, and they're begging God for peace. He even said we're begging God to change Putin's heart. They're begging God for Putin to repent from what he's doing, to leave and then to do penance and to convert. He says they're praying before the Eucharist and they're praying before the icon of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. We're dedicating ourselves to Our Lady of Perpetual Help that she may intervene and give us peace. And then the interviewer, after the translation back to English, says, oh, so the people of Kiev are really desperate then, huh? That was the response that made me turn it off. I didn't want to hear what else they had to say. Because the posture of prayer is not the posture of desperation. The posture of prayer is the default that we take. Prayer is the air that my soul breathes. It is the nutrient that causes me to have life within me. It's not my last resort, it's my first resort, my middle resort, my third resort, and my last resort. It's every breath that I take is my relationship with my God. That was kind of my first reaction to her saying that. I angrily clicked it off. But then I thought about it. On 9/11, the churches were average filled. 2001. On September the 12th, I remember seeing footage of the cathedral in Mobile, and it was the most full that I've ever seen that church, even including chrism masses and Christmas and ordinations and all the big celebrations. Churches were overflowing on September 12th, 2001, perhaps out of a feeling of desperation. A little thought experiment, and I want you to take carefully the words that I'm carefully speaking in this thought experiment. I'm not condemning anyone at all. I'm not blaming anyone at all. But my thought experiment is this. In the months leading up to September 11th, 2001, what if the cathedral, what if the churches were overflowing like they were on September 12th for months leading up to September the 11th, 2001? Would the terrorist attacks on our country have happened? Or if they still had happened, would they have been as devastating as they were? Would so much life have been lost that day? Would the war that pursued after it have taken the same form? I don't have the answer to that, but it's a thought experiment. What if the churches of Kiev and of all of Ukraine for the last several months were as full as they are right now? Would we be in the situation that we're in? I don't know. But I know this. There's such a thing as a deposit of evil and a deposit of grace. There's evil in the world. We see it. Evil's caused by human action. Right? We see evil building up in the world. The more that we reject God, the more evil that exists. And it's evil, right? It's man-made evil, it's wars, it's fighting, it's division, it's violence, it's death, it's murder, it's division, it's all of these unrest kind of things. Yes. But there is also natural evil in the world that builds up. Right? There are storms, there are plagues, there are famines. In fact, in the last 2 years, I think we've kind of been reduced to biblical times. In the last 2 years, we have experienced war, famine, and disease. That's where our world is right now. So my little thought experiment. What if the churches were full in 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19 consistently? What if as a world we were holier leading up to the evils that we've experienced? Would that deposit of grace have flowed so freely as to not see evil? I don't know. But I think it's likely. To give you kind of a more concrete reality. In the last 2 years as pastor here, our mass attendance has doubled. Our collections, as little as important as that is, have quadrupled. Our rate of people coming to faith has multiplied to a figure I can't calculate. I'll try to. This is the most important statistic. In the last 11 years, there has been 0 RCIA program in this parish. This year, on Holy Saturday, 4 people are entering the Catholic Church in our parish of 150 people. And that does not include the number of people who have come back after years of being away and just kind of went through confession and now are here daily. That does not include David Zant, who became Catholic on Christmas Eve at midnight mass. It does not include the countless others who just have come back to faith. And I tell you, that change is not because I'm a good preacher or I'm dynamic or whatever. That change has to do with the fact that people in these pews are praying. It has to do with the fact that the people who go to this church already became holier than they were. We see it changing. We see people coming to know God because we're praying. Keep it up, but go deeper, go more profound in your prayer. Don't stop and don't become content. Never become content with faith. Every day I should be holier than I was yesterday. Jesus is very direct in the gospel. The blind cannot lead the blind. They'll both fall into a pit. This podcast host, this interviewer, is a blind person. Now, I don't know if she's physically blind. I doubt it. But she's a spiritually blind person. What I mean by that is, the media, whether or not this should be the media's job, whether or not it's right or wrong, I make no claim. But the media, by default, leads the world. That's what they do. They lead, right? They take current events, or the lack thereof. They report stories, or they make them up, whichever. They put it all together, and then they tell us how to think. They lead. That's what a leader does. The leader looks at what's happening in the world, helps us digest it, and then points us in a direction that they think we should go. That's leadership. And that's what this podcast host was doing. But she's blind because she's making a theological claim. She's making a spiritual claim. She's making a claim on faith and of prayer, and she has no idea what she's talking about. When she hears, oh, so many people are praying, man, this really must be a desperate situation. What is she leading the people in her audience to? An attitude towards God that's little, that's belittled, that's small, that's not really logical. It's just nothing else has worked, so I'll just try to pray now. That's what that statement contains. And the reason the world has lost faith is because that's how the world speaks of faith. I know it's a small statement, and nobody in that instant was like, oh yeah, she's right, we shouldn't pray except for when we're desperate. It's not a conscious step. But the more the world portrays a life of faith and a life of prayer and a spiritual life in that way, the more that we, as we receive it, think of it that way. Break that lie. Break it. That is the devil influencing the world. Faith is our footing, not our defense. Faith is our foundation, not the barbed wire at the very last second. Faith is everything that we stand on. Jesus calls the blind hypocrites. How can I lead you closer to God when the thing that's keeping you is just a little tiny splinter and I have a massive beam coming out of my head? I can't see you, much less get close to you without knocking you over. I have to take care of myself first. And for the last 2 years, what we've seen is people complaining. What we've seen for the last 2 years is people being egocentric. It has to be done my way. This is what I've heard, if I can summarize. The president, whether it's this president or the last one, the president should be doing it this way. The president shouldn't do that. He should do this. He shouldn't say that. He should say this. I don't think the president's doing a good job. I don't think the Pope's doing a good job. I think the Pope should say this. Why did he say that? He should have said this. I don't think he should make that decision. He should make this decision. The bishop. Oh, I think the bishop is da-da-da-da-da. Just retire. I think the bishop is wrong. If I was the bishop, I would do it this way. I've heard, Father Nicholas, you're wrong. This is the way you should do it. This is the way you should preach. This is what we should have in the church. You're doing this wrong, and I disagree. What I have not heard is someone asking the question, is this what God wants us to do? What does God want us to do? How does God want me to act in the world? How does God see the problems that we face as a world and call me to live in them and inspire others to follow Him? What is God's desire? What is God's plan? That's the footing of prayer. Right? The footing of prayer is that I start before I ever speak. I ask God what He desires. Before I ever act, I'm silent and I let him move me. Jesus says, right here in this gospel, that a good tree does not bear rotten fruit, and a rotten tree does not bear good fruit. You know a tree by the fruit that it bears. Outside of my bathroom window is a kumquat tree. I know it's not a lemon tree because I love lemons. I know it's a kumquat tree because I can't stand kumquats. And there's those nasty little fruits growing outside my bathroom window. I love the tree. It provides great privacy. I do not like its fruit. Right? I know that Wanda's backyard has grapefruits because she brings me grapefruits. I know those are grapefruit trees because she brings me grapefruit. I know that her neighbor has a lemon tree because I've taken the lemons from them. Right? Those are lemons. Right? I know a tree. I know what the tree is because of what it produces, because of what it gives. And I know the fruit that human beings produce. Because if you look around and you see where people are complaining and they're shouting the way they would run the world, around them is division. Around them is chaos and turmoil. Around them they become isolated. Around them you have the fruits of the devil at work. But on the other hand, in those pockets where faith has grown, it draws people to itself. In those pockets where people are praying and asking the question, what does God want for us? What does God want for our families, our communities, our societies, our churches, our schools, our workplaces, our country? What does God want for us? Those places are booming. Over the last 2 years, the churches have been in decline. We've more than doubled. That's not our ego. That's not me bragging on my abilities as a priest or your abilities as the people who come to this church. That's me recognizing that God has heard our prayers, that we have begged him to do this, and that he has done it. It's from a footing of prayer that our church has grown, not from anything I've said, not from any event we've hosted, not from anything that the organizations in our church have done, but because God hears prayer and he responds to it. Because he sees people who desire holiness and he blesses that and he multiplies it and he runs it over. My brothers and sisters, I want the world to change, and if you do, the answer is that you become holy. That is the only answer, is to build up the reality of the deposit of grace in our life. If you don't like the way the world's going, good, because I don't either. But the response is not to complain and moan. The response is to plead heaven. The response is to know God profoundly and deeply. The response is to come before God at his altar and to dedicate yourself to him again and again and again. The response is, I've prayed a little bit yesterday and I'll pray more today and even more the next. The response is that I become the saint that God has created and called me to be. The response is that I continue the conversion of my heart to a heart that's madly in love with God and more disinterested with myself. The world is a scary and dark place at times. Do not be afraid of the enemy's weapon, but be resolute in God's goodness. I need you to be holy. And not you, the 40 of you here, each and every individual person here. I need you to be holy. I need people in this church, in this town of Bon Secour, in this county of Baldwin, in the state of Alabama, in the country that we live in this world. I need you to be holy. The faith is not one thing among many in my life. It is my life. That's the footing of prayer. That's how I will be able to see to lead others when I've allowed God to reveal his wisdom, his design, his will. When I've surrendered my plans and my desires and sought to become one with the Father. Then I will be holy. Then the world will change. Lent starts this week. You got your little cute gift bags, whatever. But the reason I give those out is because I just try and give you anything I can think of to make you holy. In the gift bags, you have just like the calendar, what we're doing for Lent. We have something every single night for the next 46 days. There's something every single day to help you be holier. On the other side of that card is your listing of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. How are you going to pray more this Lent to draw closer to God? Write it down on that card where it says prayer. How are you fasting? What are you giving up for Lent? To let go of the world better. To surrender your life better into God's hands. Write it on that card and do it. And then the last blank, almsgiving. What charitable action or gift are you giving to someone else as a reminder that your life is not about you, but it's about God and serving his people? I put them on postcards because if you're like me, you just think about Lent, you'll never do it. But if you write it down, you put it on your bathroom mirror, on your kitchen refrigerator, or wherever, that you have to look at it every day and say, oh yeah, I have to do that today. Then you'll actually do it, to be practical. Also, there's a guide to confession. I don't know what else to say, other than fall in love with the sacrament of confession. Go monthly, at the very least. Right? There's a full guide. It's 8 pages long. Examination of conscience and step-by-step how to do it. Don't be afraid of it. Be excited for it. Excited for the freedom and the holiness that comes from that sacrament. And then there's the daily mass readings. I want you to pray every day. And people always say, well, Father, what do I pray? Where do I start in the scriptures? Well, there you go. It's dated. Go to that day and read that gospel and sit and meditate with that gospel. Pray every day. Go to the sacraments. Storm heaven with your prayers, your requests. Become holy. Because we need you. This church needs you. I need you. The world needs you to be the saint that God made you to be.